Hello and welcome to ARIS Training Module 2, Session 4, where we will discuss the functional routines lessons in ARIS. In the previous session, we learned how important it is to establish a rapport with your students and to determine their preferred reinforcers. In this session, you will learn about another set of lessons that every student will start on day 1, functional routines. Functional routines are the activities that we do in our everyday life, such as getting dressed, eating breakfast, and brushing your teeth. For a student in the classroom, functional routines might include arrival, departure, and circle time. These activities consist of a series of actions that are largely the same every time we do the routine. The ability to perform these activities independently is necessary for daily living. Once a student masters the ability to complete routines without assistance, they will no longer rely on others to carry out the basic activities of independent living. This can reduce frustration, which in turn leads to less challenging behaviors, and it can free up time and energy for educators and families. Students will encounter many functional routines starting on the first day of school. For example, in most classrooms, all students will arrive, have a snack, use the restroom, wash their hands, and depart to go home. The ARIS functional routines lessons makes these everyday tasks smoother for your students and the entire classroom. These lessons teach your student how to approach a routine one step at a time. This process of breaking down complex tasks into smaller, manageable steps is called task analysis. And creating task analysis is a bit of an art form. First, you need to consider all the minute steps that make up the task or routine. Once you understand which smaller steps make up the routine, you will need to make sure that your students have the necessary skills to complete each step. If a student lacks any of the skills to complete a specific step, you will need to isolate those skills and teach them to the student one at a time. For example, if you are teaching the student to wash their hands, but they can't turn on the faucet, you should have them practice turning on the faucet until they can do it easily and independently. Once the student is able to turn on the faucet, you can start to add in the rest of the steps, like using soap, rinsing hands, and drying hands. Although the lessons in the ARIS functional routines content category already breaks down common classroom routines into smaller steps for you, it is still important to understand how to create a task analysis yourself. If your particular classroom routines vary, or if a student struggles with the task analysis with a particular lesson, understanding the task analysis process will allow you to follow some basic steps and modify the lesson to meet your students' needs. Let's dig in a bit deeper and examine these steps of creating a task analysis. Every task analysis begins with choosing a skill or a routine to target. The best way to choose a routine to address is by looking at the student's unique needs and goals. Depending on the student's age or developmental level, certain critical life skills such as toilet training will be a first priority. Next, you will assess the student's ability and motivation level. Begin by collecting baseline data on the student's ability to complete the identified skill. As we talked about earlier, you may need to teach your student a preliminary skill, like turning on the faucet, before you can move on to another step. Similarly, if the student can perform each step, but they lack motivation, you may need to evaluate how to provide separate reinforcement when going from step to step. Once you have some baseline data on which steps the student can complete independently and on their motivation level to complete the task, you will start the process of breaking down the skill into smaller steps. A good way to go about this is to complete the steps yourself or watch someone else complete the steps and then analyze the process as it occurs. When you think you've identified all of the separate steps, you should review the process to determine whether your task analysis is complete and intuitive. By having someone else run through the steps exactly as you have written them, you can see if you've left out any steps and then make revisions as needed. Now, you can develop your plan for how you will teach the skills to the student. Some students may be able to complete some of the steps by themselves already, so you can build on that. You will also want to consider whether you use forward chaining or backward chaining to teach the task. While you might choose to use either forward or backward chaining when using a task analysis to teach functional routines, it is critical that every person who is working with the student approaches the task in the same way. Everyone should be using forward chaining or everyone should be using backward chaining. It won't work to have a staff moving in different directions through the steps. In addition, everyone teaching the student needs to know which steps of the task the student has mastered and which they are still practicing. Accordingly, it is critical that the student's record binder contains clear data on how you are teaching a task and where the student is in their progress. You just learned that task analysis and chaining are critical tools you need to build strong, functional routines. Now that you have those tools, let's examine the best way to build fully formed routines into the students' daily schedules and into your classroom. Here are a few tips to implement these tools. The goal is always for students to be as independent as possible, so make sure to prompt at the minimal level necessary to encourage success in their routines. Then fade the prompts as quickly as you can. In the hand washing example, at first you may need to use full physical hand over hand prompt to guide the student to turn on the faucet. Then you can fade to simply pointing at the faucet and ultimately remove the use of any prompt at that step. Similarly, you can systematically fade the intensity of the reinforcers that come between the intermediate steps in a task analysis. For example, if you are forward chaining the hand washing task, you may initially follow the steps of turning on the faucet with a food reinforcement, and then fade down to a simple "good job" before completely transferring the reinforcement from that step to the combined steps of turning on the faucet and wetting hands. Another tip for encouraging independence and functional routines is to organize your classroom in a way that makes it easy for students to remember and follow the routines. What does this look like in practice? Routines tend to take place in specific locations of the classroom. Clearly defining those spaces and providing visual cues can serve as a helpful reminder. For example, providing an obvious area for students to line up for the dismissal routine can be accomplished by having colored dots or mats on the floor. For arrival, adding cubbies with the student's name or picture and coat hooks are visual cues to the student of the routines of hanging up your coat and putting your backpack away in the correct place. Another way to set up your classroom for success is to make sure that the materials needed for the routines are in the location where the task will happen. So, of course, if you want to make sure they're washing their hands correctly, we want to be sure the soap is in the bathroom and the plates and napkins are in the snack area for snack time. And always, keeping the students' updated schedule in the same classroom location will make sure students know exactly where to go when you ask them to check what is next in their schedule. Using visual cues to guide students through regular functional routines can be very helpful for students and staff. This can be accomplished by using mini visual schedules or task strips. The mini visual schedules or task strips will contain a picture to represent each step in the routine. For example, for departure routine, you may provide a task strip that has a picture of a coat, a cubby with a lunchbox and backpack, a picture depicting a student waving goodbye, and a picture of a bus. Some students may always need a visual cue to complete certain routines, and that is okay. But the goal should be for a student to use the visual cue to complete the routine independently, rather than rely on a staff member to prompt each step. Visuals also serve as good reminders for the staff so they are consistent with the routines for each student. Even after your students learn the routine specific to your classroom, you may want to reevaluate the routine and adjust for any changes that occur throughout the year. For example, when the year starts, the students may not be wearing coats and carrying umbrellas, but as the year progresses, they may need to adjust the arrival routine to add hanging their coats up and putting away their umbrellas. Even if a regular routine hasn't changed, it can be important to review the routine with students and staff after extended breaks or absences. Functional routines are a critical part of students' daily life, both in and out of the classroom. As discussed earlier, mastering basic routines will improve the lives of students as well as the lives of staff and caregivers. And functional routines are a big step towards making the student more independent and self-sufficient. You have now completed session 4, where you learned all about functional routines, including how to create a task analysis, forward and backward chaining, prompt fading, and more. In the next session, you will learn about the importance of collecting data and how ARIS simplifies and systemizes the data collection process.